Well, thank you very much to Chad for that really inspiring presentation and really showing the breadth of applications based on nanotechnology R&D. So we are now at our closing discussion, and I'd like to introduce my colleagues. So if everyone could turn on their videos. This afternoon, I'm joined by Alex Little from NIST, Anil Patri from FDA, and Mia Siochi from NASA. And to get us started, I'm just going to throw it maybe to Mia and say, you know, after 3 days and an awful lot of content that we have to absorb, what are your initial thoughts?
Yeah, thank you, Lisa. Thank you to NNCO for putting together this great workshop. I mean, like you said, there's a lot of content, and I appreciate all the engagement from the speakers and the participants. I go back to what NNI's vision, states, right? That we're envisioning a future where the ability to understand and control matter at the nanoscale leads to a revolution in technology and industry. And all of that to benefit society. So from listening to the talks, it's like the future is here, right? The NNI investments have enabled science discoveries and inventions of technologies. So we're starting to realize societal benefits. And as Chad Merkin noted, but as Chad Merkin showed very nicely, several examples. But he also noted it's not enough to do the science, and the benefit is realized in its use, right? It's interesting use of the Gartner hype curve because I think when you look at that, NNI has invested in a lot of the discoveries that have triggered hype curves. But moving forward, we're trying to figure out how NNI can provide us the framework that supports, the moving these discoveries to the plateau of productivity. And what we've heard in the last couple of days is that's not easy, right? There are a couple of quotes that's stuck with me, in the discussions. One of it is, it's hard to engineer commercialization. And the next thing is, and all of this is dependent on people, right? I think it's a common refrain that there's a different way of thinking, and as Chad very nicely described in several examples, there's a different way of thinking about how you capitalize on the inventions, and perhaps that maybe we start thinking about, maybe we need to start thinking about how we can cultivate that thinking as systems level thinking, and of not just the invention, but how you solve a problem and how you then take the solution to market. And we all recognize that nanotechnology is multidisciplinary. I'm wondering if we got to broaden that view of what multidisciplinary is, because there's a business side to technology maturation that maybe we also need to start to cultivate. And so this workforce that we are training with all these investments, perhaps we could think about how we might change the way we think about STEM education. It's not just science and technology, perhaps. There's the communication part, there's a business aspect. And by the same token, from the business side, having an appreciation for science and technology. And the second quote from this morning, all that, it's hard to predict what will be successful, right? But also I think we have heard affirmation that NNI support of resources, have helped support the maturation as well. And so we probably need to also start thinking about, how is the infrastructure that's already in place, how can we maybe better improve, and support the needs for the tech maturation. So I think, there's rich food for thought, from all of this for the NNI community. So, thank you.
Sure, that was a great way to get us started. Alex?
Well, thank you, Lisa. Thank you to you and the team for putting together this workshop, and to all the speakers who've given just fantastic presentations. It really was wonderful to listen to and to see how much progress has really taken place. We started out many years ago really focused on the basic science, tremendous breakthroughs there, but the whole enterprise has evolved so much further and is now really delivering products and meaningful technologies to the marketplace. And just to riff off something that Mia said, with regard to the Gartner hype cycle, expectations were extremely high in the beginning, but for anybody who's actually been in science and done technology transfer, you're looking at a 20 to 30 year time frame, despite how easy Chad makes it look. He had some wonderful examples there. And I think, that emphasizes just the need for a continued long-term focus, not just of the science, but the technology transfer. We had some really great talks on infrastructure, which, as they used to say, a puppy's not just for Christmas, it's for life. And the same is true of infrastructure. It's not once and done. It needs to be supported and evolved. I think we heard some comments along those lines, as new players come into the nanotechnology field, evolving the infrastructure to meet their needs. And it's always a system problem. And as Mia eloquently put it, it's not just a system problem in terms of the science and technology, but also the business aspect of it. And I think all that goes to this notion of not just interdisciplinary teams, but sort of the agility in terms of mode of thinking. And I know from my own experiences interacting with industry, and I'm sure many other people have this as well, the problem that actually needs to be solved is frequently not the problem that you thought needed to be solved when you started. So, it's maintaining that flexibility. I think we had a few people, who have experience of commercialization saying, the ability to pivot rapidly is essential. As scientists, we often we fall in love with our particular ideas, our particular research fields, but, maintaining that openness and realizing that the thing that, you've been excited about is maybe not quite what's needed, bring in the additional expertise, be flexible in your thinking and so on is really important. And again, this notion that success is hard to predict, frequently, because it is such a system problem, we're looking for advances on multiple fronts. When we pursue the basic science, we're optimizing typically along one, maybe two performance axes to get a product to market. You've got maybe 15 or 20 different sets of technological constraints that you have to satisfy, plus things like cost and manufacturability and so on. So really taking that sort of holistic view of the whole enterprise. And I think most importantly, and we heard some really good commentary on this, around workforce development, getting people involved early, just so they have an appreciation for that. They understand maybe some of the language that, different disciplines, including, differences between academia and the commercial sector are using. You don't have to be expert, but being receptive and open to what your partners in creating the value chain need from you.
Anil?
Can you hear me? Yes? Yeah. I echo Alex and Mia's comments. I've really enjoyed the workshop. As Andy mentioned in the beginning, this is a vast field and we cannot possibly cover every area of nanotechnology in the finite time we have in the last 3 days. But, we covered quite a range of topics. And I learned a few more things in the last couple of days. Obviously, we came a long way in the past 20 years since the inception of NNI. And we learned a lot about nanomaterial. There are a lot of successes from basic and applied research leading to commercialization, but also there are many failures, as you all know. And again, there are many lessons learned, at least from where I come from in the biomedical side of things. So this would give us that impetus to plan for the next 5 to 10 years. But some of the take-home messages I jotted down from the couple of days is that there is a need to put additional emphasis on education programs, especially at community colleges and smaller universities. When we think about the funding programs in nanotechnology, usually even Peter's programs that he presented, you go to big research universities, but also we need to think about the workforce. There was a discussion around the topic that I really like, that we need to put that emphasis, but also we need to do a better job in capturing the successes in the interdisciplinary science training aspect of nanotechnology. When I was at University of Michigan, physicists used to talk about cancer and cancer biology, and biologists would talk about nano and chemistry. And so we don't, I think we don't do a good job, but there are many successes. We have an increase in product submissions. We have many successes in clinical trials, more than 70 products approved for clinical use, and hundreds of them are in clinical trials. The other thing I got is that obviously nanotechnology is very diverse. We talked about scale up, but scale up is not the same for everything. So if you talk about nanocellulose that was presented, we're talking about what, $5 per kilogram. Whereas if you do the same for quantum dots and carbon nanotubes, they're quite expensive, and especially for biomedical applications. And I think we have to put those in that context. One final thing I want to capture is about the vaccines that were discussed, and the rapid way that these are developed using lipid nanoparticles. But as you know, as we all know very well, this actually is the research that was done for the past 20 years or more on lipid nanoparticle technologies for the gene delivery systems. And so that really led us to this year, and within a year we have these successes. And so I'm very happy with the successes we have, but we have a lot more to do in the biomedical field of nanotechnology.
So I wanted to pick up on a couple of things that I heard from you and heard throughout the past several days. You know, one of the things is this issue of multidisciplinarity, interdisciplinarity. I think Paul mentioned this morning, and it's something that I've heard over the past couple of years as we've been rolling up what the NNI has done. In the fact that there is an acceptance to cross discipline boundaries and to collaborate in a way that was really novel in the early days of the NNI. And what struck me in the conversations this week, and actually in some of the comments that you all just made, is that, you know, we're in, and actually it dovetails very closely with a OECD project that I've been engaged in over the past couple of years, which is looking at collaborative platforms and how this concept of convergence and bringing together people is not just disciplines to do the science, but across actors. And I think, you know, the people, the business people who are necessary to make that company a success. And the concept of translators that can talk the different languages and bring people together in order to more quickly advance the activities. And I think that my question here, there is a question here, and that is, how do we do that, right? I mean, I think we've identified that we need to do this. Have any ideas or mechanisms, we talk a lot about public-private partnerships, but have any of the conversations this week seeded ideas about how we can best bring together these actors to be more effective? And I'll open it to anybody who wants to jump in.
So I actually ran a systems engineering group for a period of time, for about a decade. And so I played the role of translator. And my job was really to, you know, explain to, let's say, the expert in digital electronics why the person handling the analog electronics couldn't do everything he wanted, and, sort of sharing the pain equally amongst the members of the team. And I don't know that there's any real substitute for that experience of people sitting down together and, coming to appreciate the other person's point of view. The worst thing you can hear in a design meeting is, well, can't you just... Well, no, you can't just, because if you could, we would have done it already. There are real reasons why we're making the choices we're making. And I think, as you go through your academic education, you're typically focused pretty narrowly. And it's not that I would sort of suggest broadening things out so much that pretty soon you know nothing about everything. But, just gain an appreciation that the folks in the other disciplines are in those disciplines because they're important and they have something to offer. And, like traveling to a foreign country, you're going to get an awful lot more out of it if you teach yourself a little bit of the language. You don't have to be fluent, but a please and a thank you, asking for directions, that kind of thing, will radically transform your experience. And I think the same thing is true when we work together, in science and engineering teams, when we come together on product development and so on. It's that appreciation and openness. And I think, you can do a lot in the academic context with sort of project-based learning, but, really trying to solve a problem set, that would lead to, obviously not necessarily successfully every time, but, an actual product. What are all the things you have to consider? And just get people used to that mode of thinking.
I would echo what Alex said, Lisa. He ended it with systems thinking. And that is actually what resonates with me as well. When you talk about teams, we had we learned a lesson working as a team when you talk about disciplines and we're focusing on the technical side, right? And fortunately for me, in my work environment, I actually have people who are designing systems, and so when I went to them and said, hey, why don't you look at this technology, right? Over the years, I finally realized, it took a while to realize, right? I mean, people don't necessarily accept your solution just because it's novel. You have to understand what problem is being solved, and that's part of the systems thinking, right? There's an objective that we all have to focus on. And I think, when you talk about training people, it took a while for us as a team who are all, many of us were trained through grad school across different disciplines, but it's still another level of thinking to accept that, or education, on-the-job education, to realize we have to think of our own discipline in the context of the bigger system, right? And I wonder if that kind of training can be actually started, in I don't know if it's K through 12, but it's college, college level maybe, systems analysis, systems concepts, just this systems thinking that kind of primes your mind, right? And so it sets you and gives you the right perspective when you work in a team so that you're not just thinking about your own skills.
You're on mute, Lisa.
Yep. Emil, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, no, those are excellent points, and mutual respect and learning from each other's experience. When I was in Michigan, personally, in the nanobio field, you have to have a healthy respect. It's not doing an in vitro study, for example, is not just throwing some material in some cell line, and chemists think that way it is simple, and it is not simple. And the same for biologists. You need to ask the right questions to the chemist if they are giving you the good compound, the pure compound, and then to test. Otherwise, you have more failures. And then so mutual respect, a healthy respect, as Alex mentioned, but then learn from each other's experience and interest in learning the other subject is critical for a successful interdisciplinary collaboration.
So now the question is, how do we build the framework to enable that, right? And I think that with everything we talk about in the NNI, I mean, it's so broad, right? And it covers all these different areas. But are there mechanisms that you heard this week, or suggestions or examples that really struck a chord that maybe it would be something that maybe in certain topics or maybe in areas we might be able to address as we look forward for the NNI?
So, this is a question. When I think of, a high school sports team, for example, that's clearly a team activity. There are people outside the team, like the parents and the coaches and so on. The team doesn't function unless everybody works with everybody else. And then, we have the team challenges for robotics and so on, which draw, lots of participation. Do we have anything similar like that in Nano? Where, there's an opportunity for people to gain experience working on a multidisciplinary team, maybe with a prize at the end of it. Because I don't think there's any substitute for actually having to work with people from different backgrounds and different disciplines to learn those skills.
Neil, did you want to jump in?
Yeah. One area I think we keep coming back is the funding, and that enabled this training activity. And Chad is one of the recipients of the CCNE's Cancer Center of Nanotechnology Excellence that Peter presented about in the past. And what that did was to force these groups to come together, the physicists, chemists, biologists, oncologists, to come together to solve a bigger problem. And so that really, the government catalyzed this kind of interdisciplinarity, because a traditional mechanism may give you a small grant and that may not facilitate that a larger dialogue between groups. But I think that is a real success story with that kind of catalysis input from funding larger centers, which may not be possible at all places, but I think that is still a viable option to do this interdisciplinary research in academia.
And I think that many schools do have like senior projects in their engineering programs and all of that. And just a note that our Next Tech student network that we facilitate is planning a number of competitions this spring that hopefully will facilitate some of that. But I definitely think it's something that we consider going forward, how to seed some of these ideas that can be perhaps replicated broadly across centers and activities nationwide. And me, I just want to turn to you. I think that when we look at, a complex system toward a common goal, we use the term moonshot, right? I mean, NASA is famous for doing this. I mean, the timeline that you lay out over years in order to meet your goal is legendary. So with respect to, I know that you've worked on projects where you flew new materials, for instance. Can you share any insight on maybe lessons learned in those activities?
So let me first apologize that my computer is making noise, so hopefully it's not obscuring what I'm saying. Yeah, I was going to say, one of the comments that was made, I think it's day one, was that the government is an early adopter, and we're also, right, there are opportunities for us to take greater risk, and so that's one example, right? It is, I think of it, that's one of our lessons learned as a team internally, actually, is the pull, the application, the launch time, which is a schedule, right? Which basically gives us that sense of urgency, which focuses you towards identifying what the problem is, and then that pulls the team together. And so when you talk about how do you engage, how do you train people in thinking about that? I know that we have things like challenge problems, right? And so maybe what, Ann and I thinks about is what are some challenge problems that we can rally people around, right? And so that you can instill that kind of working together as a team, communicating, because you all have to meet the deadline if you're going to win, right? And so schedule with not necessarily, and sometimes resources, limited resources actually helps focus what really needs to be done, right? As opposed to, hey, we have resources, it's nice to do this. So I actually have, over the years, I've also learned to embrace, okay, here are the constraints, but we can use that to help us focus and work together, with at a systems level. And be able to measure success by getting to the end, right? Yep.
So I want to maybe change topics from kind of the system thinking in mechanisms, and maybe pick up on that last thought about moonshots and concepts. That was one of the other things that we've posed to the community through the RFI and through discussions this week. Did any particular moonshots or challenges or specific areas bubble up in the conversations that you had this week with respect to, these are potential, whatever we call them in our next iteration, NSIs, grand challenges, any topical areas that struck a chord this week?
I don't know. It seems to me there's some kind of agricultural, maybe, which to me is, it's areas that a large part of the population can relate to. So I think in that sense, if you can very more easily, connect to how people can relate, that it directly affects them. It helps us with advocacy as well, right? Public support. I don't have any specific problems, but I thought, areas like that. I guess energy would be another one, right?
So I think that's a really challenging question, because nano is so incredibly broad. Identifying a singular goal or even a handful of goals is really tough. I have to say, I agree with Mia. The ability of the very tiny to tackle problems that are very large is kind of interesting. And I was really excited to hear the talks on sort of clean water, agriculture, things like that, where those are problems of massive scale, not just in the sense that they're important, but, talking square meters or cubic meters, they're huge. Very broadly distributed, low cost, but sophisticated, in fact, intelligent technology, I think is a really interesting direction. But, if you're asking me for a pithy, we'll put a man on the moon within the decade and return him safely to Earth kind of grand project, I'm going to have to think about that.
Yeah, I just thought these are additive understanding. I heard some of the repetition that, reminded me 20 years ago, the proposals about multifunctional nanoparticles, nanotechnologies. We still didn't achieve them completely, where, if you're talking about moonshot, cancer moonshot, it's still there. We didn't really solve the cancer problem. We have these small increments of successes, but I think the targeted delivery systems with the imaging systems, with everything in one shot, one nanoparticle to have a reporting function and imaging function, everything in one. These are not new. These are there 20, 25 years ago. We didn't still achieve them. And so but then there are huge developments in the last 20 years that I'm really excited about, that even from Sangeeta's presentation, the ability to diagnose cancer at an early stage using urine. That's an amazing technology when we achieve that. So I'm hopeful that we could still get to that cancer moonshot program with nanotechnology.
One particle to rule them all.
So I'm gonna not follow up the Lord of the Rings reference. I go down a rabbit hole. But I would say that I asked this a bit to the breakout panel, and I think I was. Conversation following said it's not really fair to ask that because it's hard, right? But it is one of the things that the academies pointed out, and I would say that even though maybe explicitly there wasn't an identification of these particular areas, I think there were areas that bubbled up, like agriculture, water, energy. We know climate is a significant issue. The semiconductor industry and challenges facing that are largely, built on the foundation that the NNI has funded. And of course, the pandemic has really shown how important nanomedicine is. So I think that it will be hard, and I think Alex will work together as an interagency to try to develop those pithy, clear ideas. But of course, the point you made about how important it is to continue to support the breadth as well. I think these are issues we'll be addressing over the coming weeks and months. We don't have a hard stop. I think we were targeting about 2:30. I would like to give everyone an opportunity to maybe share some closing thoughts, but if there's also another thread you want to pick up, I'm certainly glad to do that as well.
Okay, I guess I'll just say, the progress has been fantastic, and this has been a really nice meeting to see how much has happened in the basic science, see how much has happened in the translation of that science to actual products, and just to sort of reinforce the notion that this is really a long-term proposition, So I know every now and then each one of us may sort of lose heart at some point as we pursue our research or our translation of that research, but it's really essential to stick with it. And it's wonderful to be part of this community where everybody is supporting everybody else in achieving that goal. So it's been fun for the past 20 years, and hopefully we'll have more fun in the next 20.
I would like to say, sorry, go ahead, Mia.
I will echo what Alex said. I think it's been a great workshop. And it's given us a lot of food for thought, and I'm looking forward to figuring out how we can get more translational work to really showcase where nano realize the vision for nano being a revolutionary technology that can solve a breadth of problems. I mean, what's great about it is also what's hard about it, right? It's broad, but because it's broad, it's the potential for impact is great. So, appreciate the opportunity to listen to people's experiences that are very informative, because that lived experience helps us understand better, I think, how NNI can have the right framework to help. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd also like to thank for an excellent workshop, but also the NNI and NNCO. I really mean that because we meet every month, and this is one place where we can go to through NSET meetings, and then you have 25 agencies around the table discussing where we are going with nanotechnology. That really helps each and every agency in their own internal questions and programs. But also, I would like to reiterate, there was at some point there was some lull about nanotechnology, whether whether we should continue. We are going to continue, and so I would like to say that there are many products that are approved, at least from a biomedical standpoint. That is, sometimes that message doesn't come across about the successes and also the future challenges. For example, we formed this interagency interest group on nanoplastics that really formed together through the interactions at NNCO. And it really came together very well with more than 20 agencies, 90 people now, with international interactions. So these do really help, and we need to maintain and sustain these interactions. Again, thank you, Lisa, and the group for making this happen.
Great. Well, I just want to thank you all for participating in this panel and sharing your thoughts. And I really appreciate your input. And I think that I'm going to invite the NSET co-chairs to help me say our closing remarks in the workshop. So thank you so much, Alex, Anil, and me. I really appreciate it.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Okay.